South Africa's passport is climbing the ranks, Parliament is fighting over a myth that won't die, and DStv could lose a dozen channels right before the holidays. It's another day where nothing is straightforward, but everything matters. My friends, hit that like and subscribe, and let's get into it. South Africa's passport has quietly climbed the global rankings. You see, the latest Henley Passport Index placed it at 51st in the world, up from 53rd with now 101 destinations, now reportedly accessible either visa-free or visa on arrival. Now, that jump comes in the same week that Indonesia announced new visa-free entry for South Africans, replacing that old visa on arrival system. Now, Kosovo, however, moved in the opposite direction, removing its previous visa-free status for South African travelers. Now, where is Kosovo exactly? Your guess is as good as mine. Now, that ranking shift also highlights the uneven nature of our passport power. You see, South Africans remain tightly restricted in the West. You know, the US, the UK, and almost the entire Schengen zone still requires visas. And many of those happen to be the destinations that dominate South Africa's outbound holiday travel, which is where our Green Mamba offers the fewest advantages. But zoom out from Europe and the picture changes. You see, the majority of South Africa's visa-free or visa-on-arrival access sits in the regions that we don't always consider, across Africa, much of Southeast Asia, and the majority of South America. And so for South Africans who favor those regions, their passports would feel like a Swiss. So the real story here has less to do with the passport's rank. It's that its strengths and limitations are spread across very different parts of the world. And that creates a gap between where South Africans can easily travel and where they typically want to travel. So if your comfort TV includes 90 Day Fiancé, Deadliest Catch, Chopped, or just CNN humming in the background, brace yourself. DStv says 12 Warner Bros. Discovery channels may disappear by the end of the year. Now, MultiChoice pushed the alert this week. TLC, Discovery Channel, Food Network, Cartoon Network, CNN, and a handful of others will go dark if its carriage deal with Warner isn't renewed on time. Now, the agreement expires on the 31st of December, but negotiations remain ongoing. Now, as with most things, the sticking point here is price. Warner is reportedly demanding a higher fee to retain its full bundle of channels, and MultiChoice's new owner, Canal Plus, is refusing to pay a premium rate for a package where several of the channels sit outside the DSTV's top 20 viewership. At the same time, subscriber losses have accelerated, more than 1 million customers gone in a year, which means that there's now less room to fund these expensive media deals. Now, MultiChoice insists that it's trying to rebuild value, more local content, decoder discounts, and expanded streaming limits. But unless something shifts in the negotiations, January's channel lineup is going to feel noticeably thinner. Parliament has shut down the push to scrap the so-called 30% Matric pass mark with a 50% minimum standard. But look, before we get into the politics, we need to talk about the myth at the center of this entire fight. Because despite what gets repeated every year, you cannot pass Matric with 30%. So the NSC uses a tiered system, at least 40% in your home language, 40% in 2 further subjects, and 30% in 3 others, with significantly higher thresholds for diploma and bachelor passes. In other words, that headline 30% pass rate doesn't reflect how the qualification actually works. Still, though, the politics are very real. Musi Mamani argues that the 30% threshold signals low expectations and keeps South Africans uncompetitive in maths, science, and the broader labour market. And smaller parties backed him. The ANC and the DA, though, didn't, saying that raising the number without fixing early literacy, teacher shortages, infrastructure, and ECD would only make the outcomes worse. And so that's the real tension here. South Africa wants higher standards, but the foundations beneath those standards are still cracked. And so the debate over that 30% might be loud, but it's also distracting from the deeper problem. And before we cruise on to our Bagel Bite of the day, here's a couple other headlines worth knowing. For starters, South Africa's economy grew 0.5% in the third quarter, its 4th straight increase and its longest expansion since 2021. Mining, agriculture, and trade led the gains, while electricity contracted again as more households and firms generate their own power. Fuel prices jumped today, with petrol up 29 cents a litre and diesel climbing as much as 83 cents. Softer Brent crude and a slightly stronger rand just weren't enough to counter the surging global diesel and petrol prices driven by these refinery outages abroad. And private rail operator Traction is investing 3.4 billion rand in new trains and wagons, South Africa's largest private freight rail spend yet. The plan includes 46 diesel-electric locomotives from New Zealand and aims to ease bottlenecks and support the state's reform agenda. And on to our Bagel Bite of the day. Let's see what you got. The question is, which athlete holds the record for the most men's tennis Grand Slam titles? Is it A, Djokovic, B, Federer, or C, Nadal? We'll give you the answer at the end of the show. And on to our wildcard section. Alongside those SMSs that remind you to pay your TV license, you'd think that the only other constant in life was gravity. You know, the thing that keeps your feet on the ground whether you're in Cape Town or Timbuktu. But, newsflash, it isn't. Gravity actually changes from place to place, and South Africa has its own tiny gravitational quirks mapped by the Council of Geoscience. So here's the science. Earth isn't a perfect sphere, and its crust isn't evenly packed. Some regions sit on ancient dense rock, others rest on light sediments. And so that means that the planet's pull isn't uniform. Satellites like GRACE and GHOST measure these microshifts from orbit, and when you combine these with local surveys, you get a gravity map that looks less like a globe and more like a heat map with these little highs and little lows. And South Africa has plenty of these gravity lows, especially in parts of the Karoo Basin. Now look, you won't float, you'll be fractionally lighter. We're talking as much as a gram than if you had been in Durban or Cape Town. So yeah, look, it's not enough to notice, but it is enough for geophysicists to use when mapping what's going on under our feet. And as for that Bagel Bite, the answer is Djokovic, with 24 Grand Slams, the highest men's tally ever. Federer has 20, Nadal 22. But the numbers have never really stopped the debate over who the greatest of all time is. As for you though, who do you think deserves the GOAT title and why? And my friends, that's it for today's show. Thanks so much for watching. Be sure to tune in tomorrow for our final daily bagel show of the work week. It is going to be a goodie. Hope you guys have a great day further. Be kind to one another, and we'll catch you all then. God bless.